They say being alone is a choice, but for some people, it never really felt like one. It felt like safety. It felt like the only place where their heart could finally stop bracing for impact. To outsiders, it looks like isolation. To them, it's relief. Because solitude, for these people, isn't loneliness. It's protection. It's not about avoiding love. It's about surviving what love once did to them. There are people who feel safer alone because somewhere in their story, connection became dangerous. Maybe it was growing up in a house where affection was unpredictable. Warm one moment, cold the next. Maybe it was loving someone who only reached for them when they needed something, then disappeared when they needed care. Over time, they learned the simplest equation. Being alone hurts less than being disappointed. They became the quiet observers, the ones who stand on the edges of rooms, reading energy before stepping in, the ones who flinch slightly when someone gets too close, not out of fear of others, but fear of themselves, fear of opening, of needing, of being seen too deeply. Their solitude isn't arrogance, it's armor, and that armor was built carefully. One heartbreak, one betrayal, one unmet need at a time. But here's the thing about solitude. It's both sanctuary and prison. It keeps the world out, yes, but it also keeps love out. These people know that. They feel it every time they sit in the quiet of their room, and the silence feels both comforting and cruel. Because deep down, they don't hate people. They just don't trust that people will stay, so they stop waiting. They stop asking, they stop hoping, and they start calling their walls peace. Psychologists call this avoidant attachment. It's not coldness. It's not disinterest. It's protection learned from pain. It happens when closeness becomes linked with danger, when intimacy once meant losing control, or being criticized, or made to feel small. So the nervous system adapts. It says, if I don't depend on anyone, no one can hurt me. For people with this wiring, distance feels safe. Emotional closeness triggers alarm bells in their body. They crave connection and fear it at the same time. When someone gets too close, their mind finds reasons to pull away. They don't really like me, or they'll leave eventually. It's not manipulation. It's self-preservation disguised as indifference. These people often appear calm, even confident, but inside, they're managing constant internal calculations. How much can I share before it becomes dangerous? How close can I get before I lose myself? They long for warmth, but only from a safe distance. They love in silence. They mourn in private, and they call it independence, even when it's really just loneliness that learned to stand upright. But the truth is, solitude isn't the problem. The fear of needing someone is. Because when you grow up believing that vulnerability equals pain, you build your identity around self-sufficiency. You tell yourself you don't need anyone. But late at night, when the world quiets down, your soul whispers that you do. And that whisper is the part of you that still remembers what it's like to be open before you got hurt. The psychology of people who feel safer alone isn't rooted in weakness. It's rooted in sensitivity. These are people whose systems register every emotional shift, every unspoken tension, every subtle rejection. To feel that deeply is both a gift and a burden, because the same sensitivity that makes them kind and perceptive also makes them cautious and weary. They are often empaths, intuitives, the healers and the overthinkers. They notice everything, the sigh between sentences, the tone hidden behind words. And for someone who feels that much, the world can be overwhelming. Solitude becomes a way to regulate, to breathe, to process. It's not that they dislike others. It's that they need recovery time from the noise of connection. But here's where the pain hides. When solitude becomes not just comfort, but identity. When being alone stops being a choice and becomes a cage, because even the strongest walls can turn into prisons when they're built from fear. They may say they love their peace, but what they really mean is, peace is the only place I don't have to perform. Yet beneath that peace lies longing, not for chaos, but for safe connection, for someone whose presence doesn't drain them, for love that feels like rest, not risk. They want to be understood without having to explain themselves, to be seen without being exposed, to be loved without losing control. Healing begins not by forcing connection, but by softening the fear that made solitude necessary. Psychologists call this earned security, the process of slowly teaching your nervous system that closeness can coexist with safety. It doesn't happen through grand gestures or sudden vulnerability. It happens through small moments of safety repeated over time. Someone listens without judgment. Someone stays after you tell the truth. Someone loves you, not because you're easy, but because you're real. For the person who feels safer alone, this is terrifying at first. Letting love in feels like walking barefoot on broken glass. Their instinct will always be to retreat, to disappear the moment someone reaches too close. But healing isn't about forcing openness. It's about realizing that you can be safe and connected. That solitude and love aren't enemies, because safety doesn't just come from walls, it also comes from trust, from knowing you can survive disappointment and still stay open, from understanding that love can exist without losing control. When that understanding grows, solitude transforms from isolation into choice, from fear into freedom. There's a strange beauty in people who feel safer alone. They carry both the ache of the past and the wisdom of survival. They know how to sit in silence without fear. They know how to find comfort in their own company. But the real evolution comes when they realize they don't have to live guarded forever, that it's possible to be alone without being lonely, and connected without being consumed. One day, someone will look at them and stay, not to fix, not to rescue, but to witness. And in that moment, the walls they've built so carefully will soften just a little, not because they stopped being afraid, but because love finally learned how to approach them gently. The psychology of people who feel safer alone isn't about avoidance. It's about protection. It's the story of people who once drowned in the deep end and taught themselves how to float. But even floaters deserve to rest. Even the ones who feel safest alone deserve to feel safe with. Because no matter how strong your solitude, there's a quiet part of every human heart that still whispers, maybe this time, it's safe to stay.